Welcome to Today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent, the show about work and learning after high school. I'm your host, Dakota Palicki. In 2026, the high school age population in the United States will peak at about 3.5 million students and then start to decline by 15% in the following 18 years. As you can imagine, this shift in demographics has a lot of people concerned. Chief among them are colleges and universities that are already struggling to maintain enrollment levels. They've dubbed this concern the enrollment cliff, and it couldn't come at a worse time. Research from the National Student Clearinghouse tells us that undergraduate enrollment in fall 2021 dropped 3.1% from the prior year, which is about 465,000 students. The drop is similar to the previous decline and contributes to an overall 6.6% decline in undergraduate enrollment since 2019. Now, there's a lot of action happening around this issue. It's a complex problem that requires fundamental redesign of many higher education systems. Today, we're focusing on one of those systems, the admissions process. We're going to visit with the Washington Student Achievement Council and Northern Arizona University, both of whom are making efforts to fundamentally redesign the admissions process. This work is supported by Lumina's Great Admissions Redesign Challenge, a program conceived of and led by Melanie Heath. Let's begin today by checking in with Melanie to get a national picture of how higher ed is trying to reinvent itself. Joining me now is Melanie Heath, Strategy Director at Lumina Foundation. Melanie, thank you so much for taking some time today and joining me for the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Dakota. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. So, you're responsible for participation at Lumina, which is a Lumina word for kind of how do you get people into post-secondary. That's my but you're the director, so you can tell me if I'm wrong there. I guess there's so many things that I think an organization like Lumina could focus on when it comes to post-secondary education and work and learning after high school. Why admissions? Why does admissions need to be redesigned?
Yeah. So the way that I came about this was there are so many barriers to college access that are outside of the control of higher education. So when you think about a student's experience in K-12, their achievements, their opportunities they're afforded there, their graduation rates, poverty, all of these things are really outside of our direct control as higher education practitioners. But one thing that is under our direct control is the way that students are connected to our institutions. And we know that process can be much, much better. It is pretty antiquated at this point. We also know that admissions practices are typically based off of the practices of the most highly rejective institutions, or oftentimes like the most highly selective is another way of saying that. They were not built to be inclusive. They were not built to be simple. They were not built to be automatic. In fact, a lot of these processes, the act of going through them, sometimes institutions see as kind of a merit for the student. And like, you can get through this, so you're good for us, you're good college material. And I think that we have a ton of work to do in higher education to make these processes more automatic and simple, especially because, as I mentioned, these are processes that we have direct control over. So we can do much, much better in this space.
Mm. So, you've said a couple things already that we could spend a whole show on. So, one, I love the point that you just made. Like, there's this fallacy that we use these, hey, if you survive getting through this process, you'll probably survive getting through college, as if the process that we've created
Exactly.
is some test. I mean, how ubiquitous is that? Is that a mind shift thing that needs to happen, or how is that truly a prevalent thing?
I think the answer is it depends, but I have been surprised in 2024 how often I am still hearing that argument from strategic enrollment VPs and others. And so I do think that it's still out there, and it's really unfortunate because we know that more and more Americans need education. They need a post-secondary education, some type of meaningful credential beyond high school. And we are doing ourselves, our country, our talent pool, our workforce of the future a disservice by putting these often arbitrary barriers in the path of that credential.
Mm. So it sounds like there's one thing that we need to do, which is start to separate out, or I guess correct the balance between, hey, we need students, so we got to make sure enrollment is easy, fair, so we can get folks in the door and provide America the talent it needs, while also we need to, make sure students are actually deserve to be here. And if that's a fair characterization, it sounds like what you're also seeing is that there needs to be kind of a shift in these priorities over the course of time. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, I think another thing, or just building off of what you said, you know, as I mentioned, Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce stipulates that by 2031, which is a few short years away, about 70% of adults in our country need a meaningful post-secondary credential. And I think that is true. And another thing that is equally as true is that America is experiencing a crisis of confidence in higher education. Lumina just partnered with Gallup and to do a survey that showed that only about a third of Americans have strong confidence in higher education. Less than 10 years ago, that was about 60%. And so, it might be a time for another podcast to talk about all of the reasons why, that might be. But I do think there's something kind of fundamental that we should focus on when we talk about what is a student's or a potential student's first touch point with higher education. If it's this bureaucratic process, if we're charging them money before they're even in the door, if there's this sense that you need so much prior knowledge and time and resources and relationships and social capital to navigate that process successfully, that we're kind of not putting our best foot forward as an industry, right? And I think again, in 2024, with all of the data at our fingertips, with the advent of AI, with all of these processes that we have, we could be doing so much better. And so that's one of the reasons why I felt it was important, in my first kind of year and a half at Lumina to focus on this onboarding process for students.
Yeah. And I'm really eager to get into, and I promise we're going to get into what it is that you're actually doing, because it's such great work. But I do need to just go back. There's one other thing you said that really hit me home, which is, of course, and it's, right, like so many of these admission processes, these institutional policies and practices and things that we put students through, irrespective of that student's age, were designed by some of our most selective, but I think you might have used the word restrictive, or no, the ones that rejected the most students. I think that's probably a better way to look at it, at least selfishly. And I guess I'm wondering, do you think that's because of this like immense pressure on colleges to do well in the rankings? I know that, for me, even though it was many years ago at this point, when I was going through undergrad, it felt like, my institution was always trying to rank up in the rankings. And that part of that was, selecting your student body. You'd look at their annual report. This is how many valedictorians we have. This is our average ACT score of our freshman class. We use these kinds of metrics. And so now that the pendulum has swung more, in a way that we realize that more and more people need post-secondary education to survive in today's world and in today's economy, I'm wondering if you see those tensions kind of dissolving a bit, or maybe I'm completely wrong, connecting the idea of rankings and prestige of colleges to these arbitrary barriers that we put in place to imitate, ranking.
I think your comment about prestige and ranking is really, really accurate and has been true for a long time. I also think that we're at kind of an interesting time right now, right? Again, more and more of our workforce, needs to have some type of meaningful post-secondary credential. We've talked about that a lot. Another thing that's happening is at the same time, we are about to experience the enrollment cliff. And so what that means is essentially about 18 years ago, fewer babies were born in America. And so there's just fewer quote unquote traditional age college students for institutions to recruit. And that puts a lot of kind of emphasis on changing the way that we think about access to higher education. It changes the types of populations we're trying to recruit. If there's fewer traditional age students, there's more, we need to also focus on adults. I also think that there's something about, I'm a current PhD student as well, and I took an organizational behavior class. And one thing my professor was telling me is that one of the fundamental rules of organizational theory is that organizations don't change unless they're forced to. And I think we're kind of seeing that right now. The reason that shifts in enrollment and the simplification of admissions processes are on the table is because institutions are being forced to think fundamentally differently about who they recruit, how they recruit, and to make it as seamless as possible.
Yeah, Melanie, I so appreciate that point. As many seasons ago of the show, we sat down with Brad Kelsheimer, who was Lumina's former CFO and was a senior executive at Butler University. And right next to me, he was kind of describing that there is a crisis coming to higher ed, and it really was forecasting that many institutions will close or have to merge with other institutions, largely in part because of the business model for them, for a lot of these colleges that are out there right now, are based on the traditional age student. And so we see, this enrollment gap heading down the way. And I think you're, exactly right that, organizations kind of have to be forced into, dramatic change sometimes. And I think that you have done a great job of kind of laying a groundwork, a framework, and an opportunity for places to really think about the admissions. So you created something called, the Great Admissions Redesign. Tell us about it. What was your goal? What did you do? Where are you at?
Yeah. Well, get ready because this is going to be a monologue because you get me talking about this and I can talk all day about
Perfect.
it.
Perfect.
Great. So I started at Lumina last year. And last year and that was 2023 in the spring. And it was an interesting time to be in higher ed, as it is now. But we were still experiencing a lot of the effects of the pandemic. So we saw community colleges in particular were very hard hit with enrollment declines. But we also saw enrollment declines among bachelor's degree seeking students. Couple those with, the upcoming enrollment cliff, and it was not a very pretty picture. We also saw that post-pandemic, institutions were forced to change a lot of their policies. So test optional, which is standardized tests, SAT and ACT. Pre-pandemic, it was pretty rare for an institution to not have that as a requirement. Post-pandemic, about 80% of institutions are test optional. While we're seeing among the most highly selective institutions some of that changing, by and large, most institutions are still test optional. So those things were very different. And then we also were seeing the Supreme Court decision around race-conscious admissions practices being banned, which when you actually look at which institutions were practicing race-conscious admissions, it was, again, only those very highly selective institutions. But the ripple effects of that and kind of the uncertainty in the admissions field and in the higher education field more broadly was palpable, and we're still seeing the effects. And so you take all of those things together, and there was kind of this window of opportunity to look at the entire admissions system and say, you know what, this isn't really working. And it hasn't worked for a while, particularly for the students that are most underserved by higher ed, most historically underserved. So what we did with Lumina is we decided to launch a national contest. We called it quite grandly the Great Admissions Redesign. And we essentially asked the country, the states and systems and institutional groups to send us their best ideas on how to fundamentally transform and simplify the admissions process. we kind of didn't know what to expect. And we were really excited to see that we received over 70 applications as part of this contest. 16 of those were actually from state higher education agencies, which was really interesting to see. But the ideas were so exciting. Everything from streamlining the transfer process for students to automating the process by which high school transcripts are sent in, to even going so far as to automate the notification of state financial aid. And all of these things were really, really heartening. And so we got the 70 applications. We had a wonderful review panel from admissions researchers and practitioners and leaders in the field. And we ended up awarding 7 grants. 3 of them were large-scale implementation grants to state systems or institutions who had already piloted something and were ready to move forward with their admissions innovation. And then we awarded 4 smaller planning grants in order to help support those that kind of had the table set and they were ready to move forward. They just needed a little bit of additional help with an implementation year. It has been so heartening to see just the breadth and range of ideas that folks across the country have for how to tackle this issue. And I'm so excited to see what this cohort does moving forward.
Absolutely. And I know we're going to be really excited because we have a chance to talk to some of the folks that are doing this work later on in the show. As you looked at the 70 or so places and institutions and organizations that applied, did you find any common themes? I mean, for example, already just listening to you, it sounded like at least some of the examples you cited were mainly on a technology automated, looking for a technological solutions side. Is that fair? Is that what a lot of them were talking about? Or what was the range of potential ideas and solutions that might have been out there?
I think a couple of things stuck out to us. So one was direct admissions, which is the kind of informing students before they apply that a seat is being saved for them at a particular institution. Different forms of direct admissions are the most popular admissions innovation. And they kind of range on a spectrum from incredibly, I would say, lighter touches to where you're essentially telling a student that a seat is being saved for them at an institution, but they still need to go through the application process to claim that seat, essentially. To a more kind of middle ground where there's maybe a common statewide application. So a message is sent to a high school senior generally that a seat's being saved for them. They meet the qualifications for X, Y, and Z institutions. Now go apply in this single place. And it's a 5-screen application. And then you are kind of forwarded on to the institution. And then kind of a heavier one is removing the application altogether. So removing that paperwork burden, kind of using data systems that are in place to see which students are eligible, and then just asking them to go ahead and enroll and removing the guesswork of the application altogether. So direct admissions was by and far like the most common admissions innovation within the Great Admissions Redesign applicants. Another thing we saw that I mentioned a little bit ago was we were surprised to see that 16 of the 70 applications were from state higher education organizations. When you think about admissions, typically you kind of think of that as under the purview of an institution, but more and more states coordinating our governing bodies are getting in the business of admissions. And I think that goes back to some of what we talked about earlier, where, states and systems are kind of incentivized to do things differently because of changing enrollment and demographic patterns. And states are also really looking for these admissions innovations in order to keep students in state as well. And so those two things were really interesting. And one of the most fundamental things we saw was states or systems that had sophisticated data infrastructure in place, whether that be P20W systems or state longitudinal data systems, were best able to automate some of these processes. And so we're kind of coming to understand more and more that these state or system data alignment, particularly between K-12 and higher ed, is crucial for the automation of any process, in particular this one.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because, when I saw this coming out originally, I was surprised to see how many state systems and state system office, geo offices were named in this. I'm a local practitioner guy myself, and I know you're the perfect person to talk to about this too because formerly, prior to coming to Lumina, I'm just reading from your bio here, you were the Associate Commissioner for Student Affairs and Access at the Utah System of Higher Ed. So you're perfect for this. I mean, because, when I look at it, I know that across the country, there's no SHIO office that is the same across all, 50 of our states, and some of our states don't even have SHIO offices. And then, others, have a varying, really wide variety of levels of authority. And so I know one of the questions I was looking at was saying, how many of these states have the ability to actually change a single institution's admissions policy? Or is it that you see them playing in this more supportive, connective tissue way?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think if we're looking at kind of at the highest level, looking at wanting to streamline and automate the process by which students navigate from secondary, so high school to college, in my ideal world, that process would be as simple and straightforward and easily understood as the process of moving from middle school to high school. So if that's our goal, no single institution can do that. It's kind of impossible. And institutions are also focused on, they just have different priorities, where I feel like if we're truly looking at providing opportunity to students, being agnostic about where they go, just needing them to go to post-secondary, state higher education organizations are in a really great position to do that. Their connection with the state K-12 system, their ability to provide a statewide purview, a lot of those things kind of uniquely enable SHIO agencies or state higher education organizations to do that work and provide, like you said, that connective tissue. Institutions are great and continue to be great about selling their story, why you should come to our particular institution, recruit students, be really intentional about outreach, but kind of that broad-based access play of asking or letting students know that they're in at this list of institutions. No one institution can do that. And so I do think that SHIO agencies in particular are playing an increasingly important role in the college access space, particularly in the admissions space and financial aid space, through this really intentional connection with K-12, state K-12 agencies and data systems.
Yeah. And, I was just thinking too, going back to, when I was back in Chicago, like 2014, 2015, 2016, et cetera, we had this big debate. I was with Chicago Public Schools, and we wanted to make sure that all of our students were, had some kind of post-secondary plan. Many of our students would go to the City Colleges of Chicago. And as a community college, it was open access. You didn't really have to apply per se to get in. It was open access, and so we would always have this debate because for a high school student, you're a senior, you're in a seminar, and all these students around you are getting admissions letters, and they're getting posted up on a bulletin board outside the Counseling and Career Center. And I am a student who says, I want to go to City College of Chicago for my various reasons, but I never received an admit letter or anything like that. I guess I'm curious, how many community colleges or other open access institutions did you hear from? Because I think there's also this thing, like, even though you don't have to necessarily go through an admissions process, there still are these admission barriers. Did you get a lot of folks focusing on open access institutions, community colleges?
Yeah, we actually did. A lot of our admissions redesign winners are actually focused on the transfer process, or a co-enrollment process where you're in at both a community college and at a university simultaneously. But I think I want to react a little bit to something you said. I remember, you talked about working with high school students. I worked with high school students in Utah, and I remember sitting down with a student um, who was so excited. We have an activity in Utah called College Application Week, where you actually apply to college during the school day with support from counselors and other volunteers. So it's a really great college access play. But I was sitting down with this student, and he said, I would love to go to this one institution. It's my dream school, but I just don't think I can get in. And what he didn't understand at that point was that institution was actually an open access institution where all you needed was a high school diploma to enroll. And I think this kind of echoes some of what we were talking about earlier, where our admissions processes for even open access or broad access, which is defined as more than 60% of students get in, even our admission processes for those institutions are modeled after these highly rejective institutions. And the kind of, as my colleague Oyan Poon calls it, the cultural dance we do every fall around where are you going to apply? What is your admissions letter? There's no need for that in open enrollment institutions, particularly when you just need a high school diploma to enroll. And so I think we're doing our student or potential students and our broader communities a disservice when we continue to kind of focus on keeping this application process when it's really not needed at all. A student should be able just to say, I graduated high school, I'm going to go enroll in classes now. And I think that I'm seeing some movement towards that automation. And so I feel really excited about some of the work in the admissions redesign cohort, because I think we're kind of gradually coming to that understanding and wanting to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm. So you've already been through a couple of things that you've been learning. I'm reading a great piece of yours. You kind of lay out 3 big lessons, direct admissions, obviously, a big thing that needs to happen, that is happening, that we're learning a lot from. You also talked already on touching on how state higher education agencies, are in the admission space like never before. You also talked a little bit about how automation can't happen all at once. I think there is a easy trap to get into where you think, oh gosh, we're one technological solution away from solving all of our problems. What are you learning about automation and technology adoption as part of this conversation?
Yeah, great question. I think what I'm seeing in a lot of particular direct admission spaces is, you kind of start with this one idea. I talked about the spectrum of direct admissions, kind of from almost more of a marketing to a centralized application to removing the application altogether. And I think instead of thinking of that spectrum as being kind of horizontal, you can also think of it being vertical, where you start with putting systems in place to automate, the kind of like awareness part, and then you move towards a common application, and then you can move from there towards verified high school transcripts being sent automatically, and possibly the removal of an application altogether. So we are kind of seeing this stacking of automation that happens. Another way that I'm seeing that I feel really incredibly excited about, we all know that the paperwork and bureaucracy of admissions is one thing, but college affordability is a true barrier to college. And what I feel really excited about is I'm seeing some of the folks in the great who are associated with the great admissions redesign focusing on admissions with an eye toward the future of how could they then automate financial aid, particularly state financial aid in the future, and building the automation of state financial aid on the backbone of these automated admissions processes. And if I take a step back and try to imagine myself again as a student in high school, which feels like a very long time ago, I would, and I am a senior, I feel really uncertain. I don't know. All of a sudden, I get a notification that, hey, I'm in and it's paid for. I mean, there's multiple steps that have to take place for that to happen, and then multiple steps for the student after that. But the true relief of the anxiety in the process could really come for students with something like that. I mean, that's truly life-changing for a lot of students. And so I feel really excited to see where the field moves in the next coming few years, 5 years or so, around more of an automation, particularly in state financial aid, could truly be game-changing.
So I guess, I want to tie things back together here for a moment. One of the things I like to ask myself is, what is the role of philanthropy? Philanthropy. I can't speak today. It's a bad thing as a podcast host. What is the role philanthropy has to play in various change movements? And, I know when I started working at Lumina, Jay Marasotis, our president and CEO, kind of said, hey, listen, when you know one foundation, you know one foundation. In other words, every foundation is different. There's very few rules, and everyone operates differently. So, we started the show by saying, listen, organizational behavior theory tells us that a lot of times organizations don't want to do things unless they're really forced to. And here we see a very clear need. Institutions are hurting for enrollment. And in order to boost enrollment, they need to change a lot about what they're doing. One of the things they need to change is how we handle admissions. I guess my question to you then is, why then do we need philanthropic investment to help an institution do something that's already in its own best interest? What do you see the role of philanthropy playing here? Why do we need to give anyone more money to do something that's in their natural best interest anyway for things they should be doing?
That's such a great question, Dakota.
We can edit it out too if you. I know this wasn't part of our transcript. But.
No, that's great. I will put a giant caveat and say I'm new-ish to philanthropy, about 18 months in.
That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah. So, but what I think I've been able to kind of do and see, particularly with the Great Admissions Redesign, is uplift exciting innovations in the field and then kind of share them with others. I think a lot of states and systems in particular are looking to do these types of things like direct admissions. There's no clear definition around what direct admissions is. There is not a playbook on how to pull this off. You mentioned the varying, oversight functions or responsibilities or abilities that SHIO agencies have. Some are able to do this as a SHIO or state higher education agency. Others need legislation. It is a complicated thing. Making a process simple is not simple, nor is it easy. And so what we can do as philanthropy is to find folks who are willing to invest the hard work and go above and beyond their day jobs to make something better for students, support them in that, uplift them in that, share what they're doing with the broader field, I hate to say share best practices because I feel like that's so rote, but kind of, I also think in a space like admissions right now, where we're seeing innovation on innovation, and they're happening fairly quickly and fairly large scale when you think about a state or system level admissions innovation. We need to help folks understand what's going on and what's actually working. What's the student's experience of this? There's a ton of gaps in the research about how a student experiences this, how admissions innovations are working and for whom, what post-pandemic test optional policies are, how they're working too. So that is a long answer to say, finding and uplifting innovative practices to push the field forward funding research to best inform practitioners of how to do this, and then creating what are essentially like blueprints for policymakers and practitioners on if you want to automate admissions and financial aid in your particular context, whether that be a state or a system, here is a wealth of information on how to do that. Here's connections on who's doing that and how you can speak with them. I think another thing that philanthropy is good at is building networks. And I feel so excited that we are building a network of everyone who is not just a winner or a technical assistance provider for the Great Admissions Redesign, but everyone who applied. We are wanting to be in regular communication with them, to support them in their efforts, to uplift what they're doing, and then provide some of that connection, or as you mentioned earlier, connective tissue to really kind of move together as a full and cohesive network towards this idea of simplification.
Well, I love it. I think it's a great response. Nailed it. Not that I'm any adjudicator, but but I agree. I've always had kind of in my mind 3 roles that I think philanthropy does best, and one of them is, risk mitigation. Hey, we want to try something here. We know it needs to be done, but there are costs associated with doing this kind of internal work, and you want to do it right, and so we need to be connected to a larger group of people. We need research. We need some expertise. And also, we kind of need some cover. I mean, we're going to try this thing and it might not work exactly as we wanted it to, but if we do it as part of a grant program, we can say, gosh, this worked, this didn't, let's do more of that, less of this, and this is what we've learned, rather than, committing a bunch of institutional resources, precious student tuition dollars, et cetera, to do something completely speculative. So, I think it's such a great point, and I know I'm eager to continue learning alongside you and from others in the network. That's going to be, we're going to learn a lot about how to redesign admissions.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think there's a ton coming.
Well, Melanie, thanks so much for joining me today and walking this through. You're doing incredible work, only 18 months in, and it's been a pleasure to get to know you. And I really hope people check you out on Lumina's website. I know you've written a couple pieces about the admissions redesign work, but some others as well. And folks, be sure to stick around. We're going to talk to some of Melanie's grantees here and learn more about what we're doing to redesign admissions. But for now, thanks, Melanie, for joining us.
Thanks, Dakota. It was fun to be here.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to head up to Washington State with the Washington Student Achievement Council. Joining me now is Rathi Sudhakara, the Associate Director for Strategy and Partnerships at the Washington Student Achievement Council. Rathi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Dakota. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Of course. And welcome back. I know you just got back from an international trip yesterday, so I really appreciate it. This is the stuff that happens behind the scenes, and it means a lot that you're able to meet with us shortly after such a long trip.
No, I couldn't say no to this opportunity, so thank you again.
Yeah, so we've been talking about all the different ways that folks are trying to redesign admissions processes. And, Melanie had started us off in the first segment kind of talking about some of the unique roles that state-level agencies are playing. So why don't we just start out, you're one of the planning grant awardees of the Great Admissions Redesign project. Tell us a little bit about the work that the Washington Student Achievement Council is doing around admissions redesign.
Absolutely. Before I actually jump into the work itself, I'm just going to provide a little bit of context to, really talk about Washington as a state and WASAC, as an agency, what we do. And WASAC is what we call ourselves for short, the Washington Student Achievement Council. So the state of Washington has a 70% goal, attainment goal, which really means that we want 70% of 25 to 44-year-old Washingtonians have some sort of a post-secondary credential. And we know that to make this goal a reality, we need to innovate and innovate consistently, right? And in addition to innovation, of course, there are 2 core, principles that we really adhere to at WASAC. That is, we center equity and student voice, which is very critical, we believe, to make that attainment goal a reality. And what we've heard from students really over and over, and I guess this is also true across the nation, is the most oft cited barrier to post-secondary like attainment, access and attainment is affordability. And affordability, obviously, meaning being able to pay for that education, right? Washington, as probably, hopefully, most of your listeners know, has been known to be one of the most generous like states as it relates to need-based financial aid, and we have. In fact, our need-based financial aid is even more liberal than the Pell Grant. But what we've done this past year we've really built upon the existing infrastructure to come up with this absolute innovation, which is our legislature has now passed a bill, which is in fact a law now that allows students who are SNAP eligible to automatically access financial aid without having to file a FAFSA. We're so excited about this, and this work that we are doing under the grant, that we've received from Lumina, really builds upon this infrastructure. So that's one piece of it. The other piece, which is not really often cited as a barrier, so to speak, but we know that for students to access post-secondary education, the process of admissions needs to be simple and accessible, right? And so what we've also learned is that is a place of innovation as well. And our institutions at the state across our 6 public baccalaureates have now a guaranteed admissions process, which has been has been implemented in the past 3 to 4 years. And so what this work that WASAC has taken upon is really sort of marrying these two innovations and empowering students to choose that post-secondary credential by reducing the uncertainty that generally is around admission. So when I say marrying these two big ideas, is one, providing that communication to students well in advance that they have access to financial aid, especially those students who are SNAP eligible, as I mentioned. And also guaranteeing admissions based on, of course, the guaranteed admissions eligibility requirements. So we believe that, and to just sum it all up, this communication can go to students as early as their 10th grade. And so we believe that if students are aware that they have access to financial aid and they have guaranteed admissions, we're really hoping to see a huge increase in enrollments and then, of course, also completions.
That is really impressive. First, let me just say I really applaud the effort to think about what actual redesign is. A lot of times we get into these conversations, we say we got to fix this problem or that problem. What do? We create something brand new that we have to figure out a way to sustain. And, it's always about new. And what I really hear you saying is that, here in Washington, we've built some really great, systems, some really great infrastructure. It's about making sure that infrastructure and those systems and those programs are working to their fullest ability. And that's what you've been focused on. So I love that. And let me just make sure I follow what you're saying well. So I'm a 10th grader in Washington. I'm in high school, and perhaps me and my family are SNAP eligible, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, Supplemental Nutrition Program. And as a result, I get a letter that says, hey, I have access to financial aid. Maybe this is roughly how much financial aid I might even be eligible to receive. And also, there's a spot waiting for you at X college or X university. There's a guaranteed admissions process. Did I just kind of say that back correctly?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think exactly to what you were stating is what we're really trying to do is align systems. And so that letter that the student will receive, this work that we're doing is really trying to ensure that it comes from a known messenger, a trusted messenger. So it could be either from their own, high school, or it could be from the institution that is geographically closer, because that's something that we've also learned in research, through doing research, that most students tend to, want to or pursue post-secondary education in their backyards. And so what we're trying to do is, if we can get this letter to the students or this communication, whether it's a letter, an email, a text message, whatever it is, to the students from that trusted messenger, and kind of informing them, of course, of both the opportunities available, but also maybe breaking down in terms of what are the XYZ steps they need to take to then actually like matriculate into the institution, right? And so, yeah, exactly. I think that's the goal and that's the work.
Yeah, I mean, and I so appreciate that you emphasize that the communication has to come from a trusted messenger. I mean, I know I just got, I have an old pension back from one of my many jobs in Illinois, and now I live in Indiana. I got a letter from the Illinois government the other day that says, oh, you have unclaimed property, as part of this old pension system, which I knew about.
Right.
But still in that letter, they said, hey, we realize this looks like a scam, like it's not, trust us, you can go to this website. And it's like, right, because how often do I have to interact with another state treasury office? And I'm sure if I'm a 10th grade student and suddenly I'm getting a letter, an email from, a state agency that I've never heard of, I might just, especially in today's day and age, I might just dismiss it as spam. So I love that you're also prioritizing the trusted relationship, the kind of known relationship. I guess real quick, if I could ask a kind of maybe a technical question too about, you said earlier, of course, that students are you passed a bill that allows you to make these financial aid determinations at a much younger age and notify somebody without them having to fill out a FAFSA. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners whose ears perked up at that part, especially coming after this year with all the FAFSA nonsense everyone's been fighting. How is that possible? I mean, is the financial aid award letter only state-based aid, or does it actually include federal aid? And if so, how are you kind of calculating those?
No, that's a great question, and yeah, I'll try my best to simplify and clarify that. So, in the state of Washington, we have what is called as the Washington College Grant. That is the state-based, need-based financial aid provided by the state, and the Washington College Grant is already available to students who fall 0 to 65% of the median family income category. Students who are in that category basically can access the Washington College Grant at 100% of tuition and fees at all our public baccalaureates as well as our state 34 state community and technical colleges, as well as a few private institutions. And so that is already something that we've been doing since I want to say since 2019. So what we have so again kind of getting into the weeds, what we've realized is that SNAP eligibility, the median family income is well below that 0 to 65% range. And so we are already, aware that students who fall or this, their families who are SNAP eligible can be guaranteed, 100% tuition rates at our public institutions, both 2-year and 4-year. And so while I did say they don't have to file a FAFSA, we definitely encourage students to file a FAFSA exactly to, the reasons why you stated. One, because even though our state aid, will cover their tuition and fees, of course, we want students to access Pell Grants, other scholarships, other, institutional aid that is available. But the game changer really is we don't want filing a FAFSA to be one of the barriers, especially to students, where we can imagine, if they're first generation and really trying to figure out this, complex form that they need to fill. That is kind of eliminated, at least, it's eliminated at the first stage of the process. But what we do want is once the institution guarantees admissions or once they have, gotten into an institution of their choice, the institution's resources and the supports that are existing within all the institutions in Washington will then help the student file that FAFSA and access all the aid that is available to them. I hope that helps clarify this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and I think hopefully it's an innovation other people can quickly adopt. I mean, as you said, eligibility for SNAP is fairly well defined, and there's already strong alignment with those eligibility criteria, for federal student aid as well. So I think that's a really ingenious play just to make existing supports that are already out there more available and more easy to access rather for folks. So I know you all received a planning grant to help do this kind of work. What does that look like? I mean, you're bringing together, I got to assume, a lot of colleges, universities, school districts. What are some of the things that you're doing as part of the planning process to make this all work?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I'm sure is true to many states, Washington is geographically, really diverse, and both in terms of, population density, the, racial ethnic makeup of the population, as well as the, economic ranges of the population. And so we've intentionally, sought to work with four institutions for this particular grant. One in the central region, the Central Washington University, the Western Washington University, the WSU, that is the Washington State University, located in the Tri-Cities area, as well as the Evergreen State College. Each of these institutions, in turn, obviously have great partnerships with the K-12 school districts in their region, and that partnership can, again, because of the diversity of all these geographies in Washington, some of them have partnerships and school districts as many as 7 to 8 school districts, whereas others work with like 1 or 2. And so what we're doing is trying to understand the behavioral barriers and also the assets of each of these areas, and especially by focusing on students and families who are in their whose students who are in their high school in their high school phase of their life, and so we're going to our goal is to actually do go into these regions, talk to like students, families, administrators, counselors, etc., understand what the system is right now. And I mean, I should just preface it to say that while we're super excited about the innovation that has happened at the state level, both from the SNAP eligible bill as well as the guaranteed admissions, we know that implementation varies from region to region, as it is with any policy. And so we're really trying to understand how things are implemented today, and then dive deep into the psyche, so to speak, of like students and families, to understand what do they see as barriers, like, and who are their trusted messengers, what's the best way to communicate with them, and what languages are their preferences, and any other such cultural nuance that we want to truly understand, and then design a very effective communication strategy that will inform them of both their guaranteed financial aid as well as guaranteed admissions when applicable.
So it's a lot of activity, and I appreciate that, because I myself am very much a local, regional kind of thinker, and I really appreciate that. You're saying, hey, listen, even though we have these really great state systems set up, we know that local adoption and regionalism does matter quite a bit. Along those lines, you kind of talk about wanting to make sure you kind of led with student voice. You want to make sure that students and parents and families are well supported, well served through this, but I know that part of your work also has to be, some of the changing the minds and hearts of folks inside higher ed and inside schools who maybe have been doing things, one way for a very long time, and there's probably, very good reasons why they do the things that they do. Have you noticed any, challenges, obstacles, or, raving success stories about the change in people rather than just policy and all those other important things, but, any changes in people as you've gone through this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of the work that we need to do. Exactly to your point, I think there are I mean, this is kind of like, simplifying it a little bit, but there are always change makers, I think, in every, sector, in every, like, life, in every walk of life. I think that is one thing that we are really trying to identify, right? Like change makers in each region, at each institution, at the school district level as well, and partner with them, right? But also what we've realized is, working with at least two of the institutions that I named earlier, there's a very different approach and a very different motivation to make that change happen, right? We know that overall enrollments are declining, and I think some of the institutions are clearly recognizing that they need to change and innovate to both, of course, increase enrollment, but also believing that the post-secondary education is so critical to the economic mobility that can be afforded to students and families and their communities, in their backyards. So that's one of the clear motivators. The second motivator, I would say, is that there are innovations happening within institutions in terms of even thinking about what a post-secondary credential looks like, how should we be partnering with, say, employers and, other like community-based organizations. And so as they're doing that work, they're also like really interested in changing their admissions process. So more and more students can access, the innovations that are happening in those other areas or through those other areas. And I think in terms of highlighting, I would say the two, sort of like exciting things that are happening in Washington is that in the central region, there's been a real movement in bringing really like varied partners into the onto this conversation. And when I say varied, like there is students and families, of course, from the K-12 like districts, but also community-based organizations, businesses and employers, like to come with the and work with the institution to really understand what is it, how is it that we can increase the economic, like increase basically the opportunities for like work in that region, and then design the system sort of like 360 degrees, right? Like ensuring that students can access post-secondary education in the same region, but also work in the same region, which is something we've learned from research as well, that students look for those kind of opportunities. The second innovation really that I would highlight is in the Western region is really in terms of understanding their student populations at a much deeper level, and also understanding that many of the students today in their region were not aware of the Washington College Grant, for instance, right? And so really working to ensure that that oft-cited barrier of affordability is really not a barrier for our most students furthest from this from attaining their post-secondary credential. And so to ensure that they're aware of it, and then creating a pipeline, so to speak, that will allow for students to really look at post-secondary education as hopefully as smooth as going from middle school to high school. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I think one of the other things I'm eager to ask you, I love change processes. It's a lot of what I do, and when I'm not podcasting is helping people navigate change. And one of the things that always surprises me when you get into something like this is all of the kind of like hidden things that are functioning that you didn't realize would also have to change. For one example, we were working with a partnership. They're trying to improve the way that students can access mental health services. And as they got into the work to redesign the system using just what they already have, they realized that there was 22 different referral forms that staff members would have to fill out. And so step one was, well, not step one, it was probably like step 157. But a step was to reduce and simplify all those referral forms. So now they're just down to 2. I guess I'm curious, as you've dug into this with some of the regions and with some of the institutions, have you seen and bumped into some of the strange hidden things that, you might not have been able to fully appreciate when you say, yeah, we're going to redesign these systems and do some direct admissions? What are some of the sticky things that you've heard from institutions or schools or community partners that they've had to change, in this kind of minutiae way?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I'm sure we'd actually uncover a lot more as we, go forward, because we've truly just only begun the work. But the thing that I would definitely highlight, the first piece is data sharing, right? So when it comes to identifying, SNAP eligible populations, like what we've, there are obviously a huge, set of rules around FERPA, which we need to absolutely like adhere to. And so we're really trying to innovate in trying to understand, can the data sharing happen at different levels while we obviously like adhere to all the policies that we need to, right? So is it more prudent or effective to do it at a state level? Is it like more effective to continue or to find solutions or continue to find solutions at, say, at the local level? And sometimes is it possible to do that without really doing a data share, in the sense that if the school is aware of their populations and they have the data, can we just ensure that all the other communication goes to them, so they don't really need to data share? But at the same time, that may not necessarily, and most of the time may not work. We do want some data sharing to happen either with WASAC as a state agency or with the institution. And so, I mean, basically what I'm trying to say is that data sharing is a piece that we've just, I feel like, what do you say? We're just seeing the iceberg that is, above the water. I think there's a big discovery that's going to happen in terms of how we actually like manage to solve that. In of course, again, in a way that is aligning systems and in a way that is, again, path breaking, right? And innovative in a way and sustainable, of course.
Rathi, I got to say, I am pumped. I mean, you've really got me energized. I know it doesn't sound like it, maybe, but trust me, this is what it looks like. And I'm just really thrilled at all the progress y'all are making. It's clearly a great example of taking something that you already have and improving upon it, and a full to redesign. I guess before I let you go, any advice for other state agencies out there that are wanting to do something similar?
I think I don't know if it's really advice, but I'm, from a more like personal like perspective, I've been in this work actually for a relatively very short period of time, like just under 3 years. But I think what I've seen from all the amazing like folks around me is being persistent, being really like paying attention to details, right? Like really looking into what systems are in place and how can we, find those in some ways seems sometimes maybe low hanging fruit, sometimes may not be. But I think finding what is unique to your system and how you can capitalize on that is really, I think, is what I have seen consistently happen in Washington. And of course, the two that are very close to my heart are the focus on equity and student voice. And I think that is something all of us would benefit a lot by embracing those two things. Yeah.
That is fantastic advice. I couldn't agree more. Focus on what's unique. Focus on what you have as distinct, and head in that direction. And again, I'm just really thrilled by the work that you're all doing. I'm eager to keep an eye on it. And thank you again for joining us, especially basically hopping right off of a flight and hopping on Zoom here. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. I cannot wait to hear the whole podcast, because I'm sure there are going to be more stories that I can learn from. So really appreciate this conversation.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. Hey there, welcome back. Glad you're with us, and we're excited to take this next step into learning a little bit more about what some of the grantees of the Great Admissions Redesign are doing. Joining me now is Jonathan Gagliardi, the Vice President for Economic Mobility and Social Impact at Northern Arizona University. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today. Eager to jump into the work.
And Dakota, it's an honor to be here. Looking forward to talking about a lot of the wonderful programs happening.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, Melanie was just with us, and she talked about the many applications they received, the many different types of organizations applying. Why did Northern Arizona decide to apply for the Great Admissions Redesign?
We thought that we had a really unique program and approach to the work that was happening. And that's really one of the guiding reasons for why we wound up applying to the Great Admissions Redesign. For those of you who don't know, Northern Arizona University is located in Flagstaff, Arizona. It's got 28,000 or so students, 20 or so statewide sites, and equally importantly, a commitment to access and attainment. And that's led us to recently create the new NAU charter, which is to become the nation's preeminent vehicle for upward social and economic mobility. That was born through a lot of the work that's happened in recent years in higher education, focused on this idea of equitable post-secondary value. And if you were going to sum that up in any one way, shape, or form, it would be, how do you make sure that every student who we're lucky enough to educate gets the most value out of the high quality education that our institutions offer? And what do you have to do in order to facilitate that? And so we at Northern Arizona University recognized, given that open access is in our DNA, that we had a unique role to play in helping to promote economic mobility and social impact through an approach we call ASEP, which is broadening access, facilitating success, increasing attainment, and promoting prosperity after students graduate. And so in order to do that, we approach each of those pillars with what we like to call signature initiatives and, frankly, a focus on collective impact and partnership. That led us a few years ago to create the Arizona Attainment Alliance, which is an innovative consortial partnership between Northern Arizona University and 9 of our state's 10 community college districts, in addition to the Arizona Commerce Authority, really with the express commitment to try to connect talent and opportunity to create prosperity for the people, communities, and economies of Arizona. And so as might make sense, one of the things that we wanted to do was focus first on how do you broaden access? Because if you don't broaden access, you can't increase success. You're not going to grow a team. You're not going to promote greater prosperity. And so that led us to talk with our community colleges through many of our Arizona Attainment Alliance retreats. And it eventually led us to say, oh, why do we have to reject anybody who applies to a college education? Shouldn't we try to leverage existing structures and agreements that we have, and frankly, flip the paradigm from one that focuses on rejection to one that's focused on inclusion?
Yeah, so to just dig a little bit deeper, and I'm reading a short description about what it is that you all are doing. Universal admissions, providing an affordable, inclusive pathway for students to attain a bachelor's degree. And every applicant to Northern Arizona University either receives direct admission or, instead of denial, as you've said, creates an opportunity to start their education at community colleges of choice. And then, because of some statewide data sharing you're all doing, the admissions process is automatic and seamless from NAU to the community college. So once a student actually successfully completes at a community college, they're guaranteed admissions back to NAU without reapplying. What is the potential scale? I hear you say, we had to broaden access, and here's definitely a way to do it. Go start your education at a community college if that's the right step for you, and then we're just going to direct admit you. What is the potential number of students that you think you're going to be able to do some direct admissions with coming from your community college system?
And so any given year, our immediate college going rate is well below 50%. I think most recently it was at 47%. That means is that in Arizona, there are 40,000 or more students who are graduating high school any given year who just choose not to attend a college education. And when you couple that with the reality that there's over 600,000 adults with some college and no degree, the truth of the matter is you have to ask yourself whether or not the institutions that you're either choosing not to attend or have tried and it just hasn't worked out for them are structured in a way that actually helps to facilitate their success. And so we see the scale or the potential scale of impact for the universal admissions program and frankly, the Arizona Attainment Alliance as one that can try to encourage those 40,000 plus high school graduates to go to college right away and to reap the benefits of it. We believe that in lowering these barriers to entry, in addition to some of the other reforms that are happening through the Arizona Attainment Alliance, which include everything from high quality academic pathways and high demand, high skill, high quality areas to our Arizona Ahead program and our Yuma Educational Success program that ultimately provide admissions, financial aid, academic, and career advising, in addition to direct scholarships to pilot cohorts of our individual community colleges, all the way to working with the Arizona Commerce Authority to strengthen the connection between business and higher education. We're working really hard on trying to make sure that we are oriented towards what students say they want and what prospective students believe they need to get out of their college education in order to entrust us with their time, their effort, their energy, and their resources, given the looming affordability crisis that we see in higher education. So I guess it's a long way to say that while maybe, a few thousand students any given year in terms of who may or may not be denied or historically denied at NAU, really what we're talking about is a signal to those who have chosen not to go to college or those who have chosen to take a break from it, that we are reorienting ourselves in a way that we hope will facilitate your success, your prosperity, and your happiness. Give us a chance.
So how's implementation going? These kinds of change processes can be difficult. Where are you at with moving towards this more universal admissions process?
So one of the first things that we've done is, and this is where the universal admissions program ultimately came out of, which was a year-long process with our community college partners in the ACA to ideate, if we were going to optimize our post-secondary ecosystem, what are some of the things that we would want to do? And unsurprisingly, the universal admissions program is one that popped up because it really got to the least common factor of our relationship, which was ultimately serving students as effectively as possible, whether or not they were walking through our door or the door of one of our colleagues or partners. And so having created a variety of key signature ideas that we wanted to pursue and knowing that universal admissions was one of the most popular ones, we spent the second year of the Arizona Attainment Alliance really getting our ducks in a row. And so very quickly, we defined that aspiration collectively. We wanted to make sure that every Arizonan had access to an affordable, high value, 4-year bachelor's degree pathway through A++. And we're excited to say that we're well on our way to be able to do that. And so, what that looks like is we started at small, because that's an appropriate way to approach pilots. You'll get it right with a handful of institutions before you scale out. So scaling up and scaling out is really what I mean to say. And so our first partner was Coconino Community College. They're located right down the road. They are in Flagstaff as well. And ultimately, in the year one of the pilot, they experienced double-digit enrollment growth, in part because of the Universal Admissions Program and routing our students through CCC in a way that still gave them access to an NAU education. So having seen that and having seen the early win, many of our community colleges raised their hand. And so I'm happy to report that we have an additional 5 institutions that are coming on board during year 2. And then we have 3 institutions from the Maricopa Community College District, which is the largest community college district in the state, who have signed up for year 3. And so we're really excited to know that, we'll have 7 institutions who are going to be signed up for the Universal Admissions Program over the better part of the next few years. And being able to scale and, to the extent that it makes sense, automate these processes in a way that makes the admissions process more seamless for our students, that is going to help us. Now, look, it isn't without its challenges. And you know that I'd be lying to you if I told you that there weren't challenges. The truth of the matter is that, our institutions, and A++ is a partnership, is a coalition of willing institutions who have identified shared priorities. But you've also got to fit your shared priorities into your own institutional priorities and these small d democracies that I love and that I call colleges and universities. And so that takes a lot of messy conversation up front. It takes a lot of stitching together of distinctive cultures, structures, ways of doing work, in addition to bridging together data and technical infrastructure and braiding it in such a way that ultimately allows you to serve students in more seamless ways. That means that you've got to have the relationships to be able to pick up the bat phone every now and again and just talk about what's working and what's not. It also means, seeking out additional resources to be able to help seed the work. And you've also got to have folks who are willing to work together on grand experiments like this with you, full well knowing that they're going to be fits and starts, that, again, are cultural, they're technical, and they're resourced in nature.
I guess before I let you go here, there are a lot of other colleges and universities right now that are looking at the same kind of thing you are. How might we, alter our admissions processes to improve access, to make things a bit more equitable in their own context? What advice do you have for other folks that are around the country trying to do similar work to you?
I think that one thing that I would tell institutions is that, we are at a time where there's an attainment imperative. And, at the end of the day, the social, economic, and political benefits of boosting educational attainment really have both tangible and intangible value. And this is all happening at a time when there's a real sea change in the way that people are perceiving the benefits and the value of post-secondary education. And it's become far less oriented towards the historical high research activity, elite institutions. And it's really begun to focus more on how you create upward economic mobility and how you generate social impact, in recognition of the fact that institutions like NAU, community colleges, open access institutions, they really are, drivers of society and community. And so what that ultimately suggests, at least to me, is that institutions now have a toehold and have a unique opportunity, and one I don't think they've had in decades, to redefine their identity and their value proposition in service to what makes them distinct. And so what I would encourage all of you to think about is, what is it about your institution that makes you distinct? How can you amplify that distinctiveness? Tell the story of your campuses using data, both qualitative and quantitative, to make the case for both the impact you can have and for why folks should be more confident in your ability to create positive effects on behalf of your students now more than ever.
Well, Jonathan Gagliardi, thank you so much from Northern Arizona University for joining us today, talking to us about your work, and we'll be sure to keep an eye on it. But thanks for joining us today and sharing a bit more.
Really appreciate it, Dakota. Thanks for having me, and thank you to the Lumina Foundation for their support. We all are very grateful.
Sure, of course. All right, have a good one.
Take care.
I'm left today hopeful, interested, and still with many questions. It brings me hope that more colleges are realizing that using bureaucratic and complicated processes, making students jump through a bunch of hoops, is not a measure of merit. And I'm curious to learn more about how colleges are going about this work, how they're using longitudinal data systems, and how states can create conditions for this kind of systems redesign. But I still have a lot of questions. While I appreciate the sentiment that these kinds of changes can send signals to students, signals that hopefully tell people that higher ed is changing in a positive way, I can't help but wonder how many students will see the signal. Not to be a hater, but I think my reaction would not be, wow, I really appreciate that. I really think my reaction is more like, it's about time. I'm also very curious to see how wide these changes will go. Is the enrollment cliff enough of a threat to higher ed for it to truly change its ways? I guess we'll have to wait and find out, and hopefully it's something that we can explore together. My thanks to Melanie, Jonathan, and Rathi for joining me today. Our show is produced by Jacob Mann and me, Dakota Policki, with support from Matthew Jenkins, Amy Bartner, and the team at Site Strategics. Well Done Marketing supports the promotion of our show. Deborah Humphreys and Kevin Corcoran provide leadership for Lumina strategic engagement efforts. Thank you as always for being with us, and we'll see you next time.